Hey guys, welcome back to our study of World War II. This is Vodcast number 4. Should be the last installment of this unit. And in this unit, we're going to talk about American isolationism and then America entering the war. Now, we all know December 7th, 1941 was Pearl Harbor. It's when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and that gets the United States in the war. But prior to that, we became active in the war in regards to selling weapons to both our enemies and our allies, and then that switches to just our allies. Prior to 1939, Congress was adamant, completely opposed to any kind of effort in the war. The whole Neutrality Act was working, and it was working well. Besides, most people in the United States said that's Europe's problem. Let Europe deal with it, and we have the Great Depression going on. We have our own problems to deal with. Roosevelt was opposed to this. He knew that wartime manufacturing would increase jobs in the United States, and that's what the New Deal program is all about. And so he was constantly lobbying Congress, trying to persuade Congress to start selling weapons, making weapons and selling to our allies. Definitely not our enemies, but our allies. And several programs began around 1939. Congress changes its mind with some increased warfare on the seas by German submarine boats called U-boats. And that changes Congress' mind, as well as the minds of the American people. The first policy that changes in 1939, getting us away from the neutrality, is what we call cash and carry. Cash and carry simply stated that we will sell weapons, but any European country, and that it doesn't mean whether it could be Britain, it could be Russia, it could be Germany. It doesn't matter. At this time, we hadn't picked a side. We had our friends, but we hadn't picked sides. We were looking out for us. So it said, cash and carry said, if you want to pay cash for these weapons, then we'll sell to you, but you also have to come and pick them up. Cash and carry. It's pretty simple. That passes in late 1939. I want to show you a postcard from some citizens who were opposed to this. Here's a postcard you can see from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, early November 1939. It says, Dear Congressman, 2/3 of our senators voted in favor of the bloodthirsty warmongers and money changers. So they're obviously opposed to going to war, and they're calling congressmen who voted in favor of this cash and carry policy as warmongers. You're just wanting war. That's all you want. Mr. Congressman, it's up to you to show them their mistakes. Vote to retain the present embargo bill and thereby definitely keep us out of war and end your faith in God and your fellow man. Embargo means basically no business. It means neutrality. It means no selling of anything to any country. We'll get back to embargo on Japan, but this is dealing strictly with Europe. And here is a poster, a propaganda postcard from the opposite side. Help the Allies now to win. Now the Allies would be England, Britain, France. England, Britain obviously being the same people, but England and France, they were allies. So this postcard is supporting them, cash and carry. Two other things were going on at the same time. Congress started considering an embargo on Japan. An embargo is a refusal to sell or buy anything, mainly selling, but a refusal to do any kind of business with the country. Not necessarily a boycott, but Japan had invaded China. We were kind of the protectors of China. After the open door policy, we kind of took that stance as the protectors of China. So we asked Japan to step out, let China go back to being sovereign, and Japan refused. Well, we at the time were selling scrap metal and oil and other things to Japan to help them become industrialized like we were. And so the embargo was being considered to cut off those sales, which would harm their industries. And then also the United States Congress makes a decision with all of the aggressive actions of Mussolini and mainly Hitler to begin building up our military. And we started the first ever peacetime draft in the United States. Also in 1940, back in Europe, we see the signing of what we call the Berlin Pact. This is basically the agreement between Japan, Italy, and Germany, stating should any country be attacked, the other two would rise up in defense of that country. And so we see a lot of increased tension in Europe, and so that results in the building up of our military here in the United States. Now, following that Berlin Pact, Congress makes some more changes to the neutrality laws, basically no longer neutrality, but Lend-Lease has passed. First it was cash and carry, now it's Lend-Lease, and it gives the president power to sell weapons to enemies of Germany. And again, this is because of increased attacks on the seas by the German submarines. Let's show you some pictures here of some news clips. Here's the Los Angeles Times headlines after the Lend-Lease passed. We see President made lend Britain arms, and literally that meant we're going to let you borrow these weapons for a little while, but we want them back after a short time, after you're done with them. By 1943, you can see some statistics here. Now these are billions of dollars. This is how much Lend-Lease has given to our allies. Shipping, repairs, product facilities, 1.9 billion. So we're helping out in shipping and repair and facilities and to our allies. We send over $1.6 billion of food, 2.4 in industrial items, and here's the biggest impact, $5.2 billion in weapons of warfare. And leading up to getting close to the end of 1941, it became very apparent, and you can see this is, if you look closely, this is November 30, 1941. With the embargo that Congress went ahead with, they were considering, and then they went ahead and placed the embargo on Japan because Japan refused to move out of China. The embargo was working. It was forcing Japan's industry to slow, and basically their war machine was slowing down, and they didn't like that. So they needed that oil. They needed that scrap metal. And a lot of experts around the country, a lot of military people around the country warned President Roosevelt that Japan is planning an attack, and it looked like that it would be Pearl Harbor because Midway wasn't populated. Pearl Harbor was the next closest spot to Japan. A lot of historians will debate this fact, but we had broken the Japanese code by November of 1941. We broke it back in 1940, so we were intercepting messages. We were listening to the chatter, if you will, of what Japan was talking about in regards to strategies and such. And it was very clear from what we were hearing that they were planning an attack, and Roosevelt ignored that. So that leads us to that day of Pearl Harbor. Now, prior to Pearl Harbor, Japan had sent a peace delegation of ambassadors to the United States to work out the lifting of this embargo. What can we do, short of leaving China, what can we do to get the embargo lifted from Japan and you continue selling us scrap iron and scrap metal, scrap whatever, and oil? And basically the United States says nothing. There's nothing you can do except leave China. Well, these talks go on back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and it's nothing more than a stall tactic. We've learned later that Japan had several spies setting themselves up as tourists to visit Hawaii and take hundreds and thousands of photos, detailed photos. They knew our habits in and out of Pearl Harbor. They knew what class of ships were in Pearl Harbor. They knew when they would come in, when they would leave. Once they were out to sea, they didn't know the locations there, but they knew just about everything. They knew all the ins and outs of our air bases. And our military warned Roosevelt of this, but again, that was just kind of pushed aside as just nonsense. And again, there's a conspiracy theory there that Roosevelt knew, and he knew the only way to really get out of the Great Depression was going to war. It's really unfortunate. Hopefully that's not the case, but a lot of evidence piles up that way. So he looked like he was ignoring a lot of facts, but this is also the same guy, Roosevelt, that believed Joseph Stalin was a nice guy in Russia, and later on we find out that Stalin killed more of his own people from 1943 to 1950-ish than Hitler and the Nazis ever killed in the Holocaust. Roosevelt says this is a nice guy. Finally, December 7th arrives, and people listening to the radio, the messages, the intercept operators, they heard a lot of noise on the code, on the messages. They alerted several people and nothing was done. Radar picked up incoming flights, and it was just blown off as it must be a training run, and nothing was done. And the results go down in history of one of the worst attacks on American soil by an enemy. one of the airfields that were hit by at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese planes. This is the USS Arizona going down in flames, eventually sinking. Japan had developed torpedoes to be launched from planes that would navigate through shallow waters. Remember, those spies had taken several photos and they knew exactly the depth of the water and everything. It was extremely detailed. And so they developed these torpedoes that could navigate through shallow waters. They also developed one-manned submarines that could move through shallow waters, and several of those washed up on shore a few weeks after Pearl Harbor. A lot of people want to say that Pearl Harbor was an attack by Japan, and it was an attack on a war facility, a war base, a naval base. And in our retaliation, we'll get to it later, in our retaliation, we dropped the atomic bomb. We bombed cities in Japan, and we dropped the atomic bomb on 2 Japanese cities. And our critics will say that we attacked civilians. Japan attacked military institutions. We attacked civilians. And as you can clearly see here, this is not on the military base. This is a civilian car riddled with bullets. Japan was not necessarily, they were looking to take out the naval base, but if they killed civilians in between, then that they didn't care about that either. They were trying to inflict as much pain on the United States as they could. You might recognize this newspaper. It's in the classroom. Stories that hit the papers the next morning, and then more posters about remembering those that died, the 2,000 men that died that day at Pearl Harbor. And after Pearl Harbor, we see this surge of volunteers entering the war. The next day, President Roosevelt gives a speech to Congress, to the American people. To Congress, he's asking for a declaration of war to be made to the American people. He declares that this will not be forgotten, that we will retaliate. And we do get in the war shortly after that because of the Berlin Pact. We declare war on Japan because of the Berlin Pact. Germany declares war on us. Italy declares war on us, and we reciprocate shortly thereafter. We declare war on Germany. We do go after Japan, but we focus mainly on Germany first. It's decided between Roosevelt and Churchill that Germany's is given priority, so we go after Hitler. And the first thing, one of the biggest things we do in 1944 is to try to take back France. And Operation Overlord is the storming of the beaches at Normandy, France. D-Day, it's also called. Saving Private Ryan is the popular movie about these events. This is a carrier that men would come in on, and if you've seen the movie, then you know what happens. As soon as this front gate drops down, half of the men get shot because Germans were up on the bunkers just waiting for these guys. These boats, ducks, they look like the ducks down in Branson. These boats were stopped short of the shore because of barriers like this, steel barriers in the water. And then if the men were lucky enough to make it to shore, they could use them to hide behind. But this was also designed to prevent any kind of tanks from landing and moving easily, basically becoming very huge targets on the beach. Here are all the beaches that were stormed in Operation Overlord. The British and the Canadians took Sword, Juno, and Gold. Some casualties here for the British. Utah, very few. Of all the beaches, Utah had the fewest. Omaha had the most, and that's on that day. That's the basis of the beginning of the movie Saving Private Ryan, the storming of Omaha. And once Germany surrenders in 1945, we can focus our full attention on Japan. We raid Japan, air raid Japan with several bombings day after day after day, and knocking Japan down, but not completely destroying them. And so President Truman makes the decision to use the atomic bomb after a test in the desert. He makes that decision, and we dropped 2. We dropped the first one on Nagasaki, and then the second on Hiroshima. And we'll talk about these later in class. We'll take a day to talk about this stuff in class. Well, I hope you enjoyed the Vodcast, and we'll see you later.